That's always good. Oh, okay. Okay, we go. You're welcome. That's cool. Thank you very much. It's always good to get those bits out of the way first. So, greetings. I'm going to have to work out how I actually stabilize myself now as we go. It's great to be with you. So, for those of you that don't know me, there's probably one or two around. So I think this is my 33rd IBC. I calculated. I did the very last one in the UK in Brighton, which I think was 1991. So that just shows I must have been 5 when I started coming, I think. Anyway, so I was with BT for a long time, and then basically kind of Norwegian companies that do broadcast stuff, and I've been with a peer almost just coming up to 2 years. So very excited to be here. I thought what I'd do is, seeing as we're getting going, I'd do a little bit of reminiscing just for 3 or 4 minutes to get a. Can you see? Okay. Okay. To give you some context to what I think is quite a sea change in the way we're going to be doing live production moving forward. So I thought 100 years of television is quite astounding when you think of it. And there's been lots of changes. There's been massive changes in the way people consume television. You know, linear television, as we have known it for almost 100 years in some form or other, is definitely on the demise. And also, very importantly for this talk and this show, the way we produce television is changing just so radically as well. This is a picture I've shown many times. I think it's a really good one. This is getting back to the production side. Location agnostic live production. This is a slide that the DPP came up with. Actually, during COVID, we brainstormed this. And for those of you that can't read, basically it's talking about the different models for how we actually do production now. This top model, where the acquisition devices, the cameras and microphones, the processing and storage, or VTRs, or whatever they used to be in the day, and all the controls were all co-located in one case. You know, you had your studio floor and your gallery, or you had your OB truck of whatever vintage it was, and you did that. But all of these other models now apply, where the acquisition can be differently located to the processing and storage, which can be differently located to where people are controlling it from. And that's the flexibility that IP infrastructure has given us, and we're leveraging that, and we're seeing certainly quite transformationally many people doing, especially now, more centralized production. That seems to be where people are heading in terms of the way that production is done. Also, general context, I've used this slide a few times in the last year. We're moving from the bespoke to the generic, which is a good thing. For those of you that have fought with the eye diagram on an SDI or an HD SDI, or unbelievably a 12 gig SDI signal, then we're abstracting ourselves from the physical layer now. We just have Ethernet connectivity. Similarly, a lot of the infrastructure we do is now not on bespoke devices, but it can be housed on compute, which is generic, and there's all sorts of advantages in that, and obviously a few challenges as well. And networking as well. Networking, especially for live production, was the preserve of highly expensive private lease lines. Now it's amazing how much networking we're actually using. A lot of customers are using what I call best efforts, internet connectivity. I mean, internet connectivity is massively better than it used to be, but still we're actually able to use that technology to actually run it. Another observation, compute is genuinely ready for real-time uncompressed video stuff. So, we've actually got the coming together of quite a few things. So we've been talking for a long time about the broadcast industry needing to leverage the IT industry because it's massively bigger, everything from the Ethernet interfaces, the infrastructure, etc., and the best principles as well, including security, just plugging in there. We need to learn from the bigger IT industry on that. But we actually have the ability with 100 gig interfaces are now quite ubiquitous, and we can actually do a massive amount of uncompressed video transfer through there. And similarly within the compute devices themselves, be that the bus transfer, the speed of I/O between the devices, etc. So compute is ready for that. Now about computers. Computers don't work natively like we're used to with the linear stuff that we've been doing television with for a long time. So I've got this diagram here. So we're used to a linear flow of data. And what we're actually moving to in the middle here as an inevitable trend is what I've called here, if you can't read, non-linear time-aware software processing chain. So basically, we've got compute in the middle, which hopefully, and I'm going to unpack this in a minute, we let behave natively and optimally as compute. And then at some point from the camera inwards, and it may end up being on the camera itself in the future, we move from this linear acquisition that we've got, the frame rate or the audio sample rate we're capturing the audio with, through to an asynchronous transfer of that data. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit later on. The other benefit of moving to compute for the live production processing workflow is all of those other stuff that was the preserve of post-production and offline stuff suddenly actually can become integrated. So a lot of the tools that would have been offline processes actually can become part of the workflow, and there's some other initiatives I'm going to mention that actually allow that. So in the beginning, so this is, again, hopefully some of you can see this very mechanical scanning. This is one of the earliest television devices. And the reason I wanted to show that is right up until and including 2110, which is, I guess, the latest IP digital standard that we're all knowing and loving, or hopefully mainly loving, of the last few years. We have inherited the legacy of the raster scan. So we have still got, I can actually hear a delay on my voice coming back from somewhere. We accommodated within 702110 the flyback time for the horizontal and vertical blanking, even though we were trying to start again. And that's because we've preserved this concept of linear stuff. Is there any chance of turning the volume down? That would be great. So what we've had even up to 2110, and we've got some lessons to learn from 2110, which I'm going to talk about in a minute as we talk about this hybrid workflow. We have this completely linear thinking, right from analog video through to and including SDI, various variants into 2110. So when I've got a little analogy here, I always like to have a little analogy. This is one of my grandchildren holding a hose pipe in the garden. And what I like to think of in the linear video that we've done for the last 95 years is it's a continual flow of water, or a continual flow of video information and audio information that goes alongside it. The way computers work is they like to get a bucket of stuff, do some math, and throw it back out again. They're not very good. They're not optimally set up for receiving continual small increments of data and doing stuff. And in fact, in 2110, we spent a lot of time forcing computers to behave in a linear hosepipe manner and actually very carefully spew out the data through the network interface cards, etc. Whereas they want to behave like buckets. Now, you can obviously transfer the same amount of water if you have enough buckets running it, but buckets can actually run, you can actually get a lot of water out instantaneously from a bucket. And that was one of the challenges we had with compute originally in 2110, is it would suddenly throw a lot of data out. And in a fragile UDP world on switch fabrics, it wasn't very good for that, so we had to constrain things. But actually, we need to move to an architecture where we let the computers behave with these buckets of numbers and actually do what they do well, and then we start and end with the linear stuff at the camera and at the viewing device. And actually, I guess the end game here is, the only thing that needs to be linear in this workflow is the acquisition devices themselves and the viewing devices. Obviously, there are some viewing devices in the middle that the production team need to actually view part way through. But apart from that, you can see the picture really well when we go into tunnels, can't you? So what we've got, this is 2025, so I've done a timeline from 1936, which I think is a reasonable approximation of when we really started doing television, all the way through. So we've got all of the analog stuff, all of the SDI stuff, all of the 2022-6 and TRO3 and 4 and 2110. And we get to this point here. So linear analog, linear digital, linear IP, and then asynchronous IP. And that's where we're at this year. So many of you will have heard lots of talk about MXL. I'm actually wearing an MXL badge, and I've got a thing on the back of my pass as well. And a lot of that, you can hear some more details of that unpacked on the boat this afternoon if you're coming back. But I wanted to give you a context of how that fits in, and also some of the challenges we're going to have as we move forwards, because it's not a done deal. So hardware and software processing, you're probably familiar with this, but hardware devices took a defined time to do anything. Software execution is a bit of a bell curve, and there is a maximum time you can expect your compute to do it, but it's a much more uncertain execution period. So we have to take that into account. And then obviously, if we're summing different signals from different places in compute, we actually have to wait for the worst case time of arrival for each of those processes before we can actually do the math of, say, mixing two video streams together. So that's like some fundamentals. So what we're looking at doing is, the purple is like the linear interface, and then as we hand information between software production processes within compute, we need to do this asynchronously. We don't want to have to go back to 2110 with the -21 timing model and all of the effort that takes. Not only does it take effort, it takes compute cycles to do that. It also costs time. Now, latency, as many of you know, is a pet topic of mine. And one of the things that has been really bad about latency in broadcast as we've evolved from SDI into 2110 and IP in general is we've made latency a lot worse. So whereas by the time we got to the end of the SDI generation, a really good spec vision mixer from someone like Grass or Sony or whatever probably only had 3 or 4 or 5 lines of video latency, so like a couple of hundred microseconds. Because of something called TR offset and the way we define some of SMPTE 2110, suddenly everyone got scared of actually putting something out that was just delayed by 300 or 400 microseconds. So everyone delays every part of the chain for a video frame and pushes it out on the next video frame. So every part of the process now inherently accumulates 1 frame delay. So you concatenate that. That's very, very frustrating. We don't need to do that. Added to which, a lot of software implementations actually have been very, very poor in terms of shoving lots of buffers in. Because one way to actually get rid of most problems in software implementations of real-time video is to shove loads of buffering in. You've only got to look at the way your end devices buffer stream when you view and listen to things at home. You shove a 20-second buffer in, and pretty well you can get away with anything. And so what we need to do is, because if you think about compute, each compute cycle generally is working much faster than real time. So it may be working, doing a wipe on a couple of, between 2 video sources. It can probably do the math on that in 1.5 milliseconds out of the 20 millisecond frame that you've got. So that data is ready then. Now in the 2110 world, we would actually sit there and wait for 18.5 milliseconds and then make that available. But actually in this compute world, we can actually say, as soon as that data is ready, we can make it available asynchronously to the next place. And that situation can ripple down. So actually the cumulative latency only needs to be as long as the next data set is ready for the next processing. So actually this can be vastly quicker, even than it used to be in the SDI world, because we still had to do some manipulation there as well. So the time that we're taking then is, we've got this like T0 plus X, which is the time from acquisition to the point it enters the compute. And then we've got like the worst case aggregated time of these asynchronous processes. So, we talked about that bell curve. So we need to accumulate the worst case processing time of all of those concatenated functions. So say we've got 5 functions that take, each take a worst case of 8 milliseconds. Then we've got 40 milliseconds worth of latency. So we can then reconstruct, if we need to, linear time at the end and give it a bit of margin. So T plus 50 milliseconds here. That gives us the margin for our worst case compute cycles to do that. And we're actually less than 3 frames of delay in for going through all of those processes. So we need to get right this time. So I've talked about this. So we've got acquisition through to consumption, or through at least to the end of the production chain. And one of the things that we didn't think of, well, it was thought of, to be fair. BBC R&D, in their original proposition of TR03, actually covered this, but the industry got rid of it, was actually saying, if we're actually going to capture the stuff, the most important thing we need to do about that acquisition is keep the time of capture, the origination time. We need to keep that through the production process. Now, the reason we didn't do that properly in 2110, we did define it, but we did it by manipulating in an inappropriate way RTP timestamps, and then we didn't. Then every device in the chain was not mandated to propagate that, so we actually restamp all the way. So we lose any concept of origination time, which is very, very unfortunate. The reason we've got away with it for the last 8 years in 2110 is because of that hose pipe. Because in the hose pipe, traveling with a constant speed of water, I know that like 1 meter, 20 centimeters of water behind is the next video frame, because it's a constant flow. So I can work out just by the nature of the buffer where I need to go back to the next thing. As soon as we hit native asynchronous compute, we haven't the clue what the hell's happening, because like each clump of data has no association that you can infer from the way you're transferring it, because it's all asynchronous. So what we have to do in this process is get it right and actually get timestamps, timing information from origination, or as close to origination as possible. There's going to be a few compromises there probably along the way, but as close from there as possible. We need to get that timing information, and we need to link it intrinsically and immovably with those data elements, those clumps of data, those buckets of data of the video and audio signals, etc., as they propagate the system. Now, MXL, as it stands today in the prototype, doesn't do this yet. And we've got some system-level architectural thinking. There's also a lot of other things that we didn't get right in 2110, like other metadata that may be important from origination, like there's a whole load of camera information, or information about the way you're acquiring the vision and the audio that would be very useful downstream to know, in terms of if you're doing any conversion processes, actually knowing the information about exactly how it's captured, and that gets lost as well. So there's what we need to do as part of this asynchronous compute thing is make sure the timing model actually works systematically. And I think what we've done so far on MXL, what we did with 2110, I guess like we did with STI as well, we've focused on an interface. We're focused on that specific interface, not thinking about the end-to-end system. So I've been having some conversations with some of the other people in the industry that are looking at this during this IBC, and we're talking about doing another JTDM reference document this autumn that will actually not only define the interface, but will actually define what the end-to-end system needs to give us, so we can actually optimize latency, optimize efficiency, and optimize the ability to timing recovery, because we are still having to do manual lineup of or realignment of essences downstream in productions. That just should never be necessary in today's world. We should have that time information with us to carry. So the stuff that's been leading up to where we're at the MXL, the Video Services Forum has done some great work in the last 2.5 years on the timing models, on thinking about what we need to do to get in and out of, when we say cloud here, I mean compute in general, and also this purple bit, which is specifically what MXL is becoming, this cloud to cloud, compute to compute. So this will be unpacked later today. You've probably seen the model in presentations already. The EBU did a digital media facility paper, which was published this time last year, just in time for IBC, and it's a layered concept, but one of the layers is the media exchange. And just thinking back to those, we don't need to worry about SDI interfaces or XLR audio interfaces anymore for AES3. What the idea of this is saying, if we're running on generic compute, all of this stuff below that is not something that's relevant to us. It needs to be competent and capable of doing integral data transfer within a time-bound period. But the media exchange can sit on top of that. So we don't need to worry about the fabric stuff in terms of the infrastructure, but we can define these layers. And the media exchange layer here is the bit that is becoming MXL. And we're converging some of the thinking from the industry to that. Now, there's another Another piece of thinking that's been done, which actually is dovetailing in quite nicely now, is by the BBC, the TAMS, or Time Addressable Media Store. And this is a concept of actually having it's very simple, it's kind of obvious, but actually saying we're actually going to take that timestamp, that timing information, which we have now propagated and secured as being associated since acquisition, and we're going to use that to write into media storage. Now, that media storage can be used for near real-time stuff. So if you've got compute that's doing automatic highlights generation, stuff like that, as soon as that data's been fed in into this storage, that can be then available for anybody else that wants to use it, or any other AI processes, etc., and any tools that actually want to make use of that data. Now, whether or not you actually use that TAM storage as part of the live production workflow is an interesting question, because it does incur latency. I mean, it depends what the chunk size is basically that you're storing. So you've probably got a signal-centric path and a storage-centric path that you would have within a production, but that's an important side component. So I've been talking the last few months about a double hybrid future. So I think we've got a future where we need hardware infrastructure on the ground to actually get signals through from wherever the acquisition is into our production. The production, however, is definitely becoming more and more soft. And the reason it's a double hybrid is that software implementation may be hosted on your premises or close to you where you're doing the production, or actually may be hosted anywhere else. And I think what we're seeing generally as the preferred architecture is of the hybrid is actually people saying, we're actually going to take our base load on-prem, and we're actually going to use public cloud to flex for events and dynamic stuff. So that's kind of the thinking of hybrid. Okay. Challenges of the MXL journey. There's a few elephants in the room. I've talked about timing. We have to get that right. There's also the whole control and orchestration. If you think back to 2110, we were a bit slow off the mark with NMOS, getting that up and running. There is a danger where we're also going to be slow on the mark with this, so we really need to coalesce with an industry. And I think what we need to try and do is make sure that all of these elephants are named and put into working groups so we can actually address them as we move through this autumn and through to the spring of next year. Okay, a year for consensus and action. So I'm excited by the way the industry has come together on thinking about this asynchronous compute stuff alongside our traditional 2110 workflows. And I think this is a year where we're actually going to see, I don't think we're going to see any serious products that are actually supporting this fully this year, but next year, those will be realized due to the groundwork that's actually going in this year. So there's a few demos you can see in Hall 14 on the accelerator stands for LMX and MCC. Do go and check them out. We've got some things we can show you on our stand in Hall 1, so do come and find us. And on our booth, we are doing very, very nice cups of tea. And I would like to reiterate, if you're ever in the UK, do come and check me out for a nice cup of tea in my garden as well. So thank you very much for your time. It's been great to be with you.